I believe true principles are always true principles, and it's the application that changes. This is why I'm excited, because today I'm talking with Anne Laffin. Anne is an experienced marketer who specifically works with small companies with small teams and a small marketing budget. And what's beautiful is she's taken the principles of marketing and she knows how to be resourceful. She knows how to be scrappy and knows how to help small companies, I would say between 1 million to 10 million, and show them what levers to pull to attract their ideal customer and client. So I'm super excited for you to listen to our conversation. I want to actually read what you shared with me on your bio because I thought it was so good. It was so short and concise. You said, I am a problem solver, strategist, and content creator that helps entrepreneurs and founders grow and amplify the inspiring work they bring to the world today. And I have so many questions for you, Anne, about marketing and where we're headed with marketing and what are the tools that we can utilize today so that we can speak to our customers in an automated, scalable way where it's a human connection. I think that's what I'm always curious about. And before we jump into that, I am really curious about you and kind of how you ended up to where you are. So tell us the story of an experience that has radically formed and shaped how you view the world today.
Oh boy. Well, I mean, the collective, years, 20 years experience have all shaped where I ended up today, right? But it's not just my professional experience. It's also the personal experience too. I mean, that certainly forms what ends up happening in your office, in the workplace. But I think, from a professional standpoint, I've had experience in market research, right? I've had experience in financial services and in startups and landed working with startups because I really love the fact that most, not all, right? And the startups that I work with are really looking to make a difference. And that's what resonates with me. The time you have on this planet is short, right? Nobody as short as we get or as long as we get.
Yeah.
And I just am trying to figure out how to make the most of that time. And so working with startups while still being a marketer seemed like the best way.
And that makes so much sense. I think as human beings, especially people who are really intentional in their life, we're looking for something that's meaningful to us. And, as I read your bio and as I was on your website and I was like, she works with startups, like there's a whole array of potential clients. And I would say startups are potentially one of the hardest, but to your point, also potentially like the most fulfilling and rewarding because of what you were saying. Like they actually want to make a difference. Being an entrepreneur, it's like the hardest path you could go down. And so what drives that person? Well, they're mission driven, right? They have something really important that they want to see brought into the world. And how cool that you take your skill and your ability and you're like, you know what? You're not the easiest person to help, but that's okay. I'll help you. I love that.
They need it. Honestly, they need the most help because they're typically, I work with really early stage companies. It's a small crew, right? You might have 2 to 5 people, if you're lucky.
Yeah.
And I know this is a phrase you hear a lot. You're wearing all the hats because you are literally, you're doing all the things, right? You're like, And that's kind of how I feel. Like that frenetic energy, I think, is very common in early stage and they need help. And so I get it and I appreciate it. And some days it's frustrating, but I love it.
Yeah. One of the things, given your background and everything that you've experienced, one of the things that you focus on that you're good at is helping people get clear messaging, which can sound so simple, and yet it is not. What is your process for helping a client really nail that message that's going to resonate with their ideal customer?
I start with, and it does sound simple, except I don't find this process to ever be simple, but we answer these questions. We answer why, which is the most difficult.
Yeah.
We answer who, what, how. Like we start there. It's not right. And it's so basic. But most, I find, founders, right? We'll call out founders here because that's who I work with in this case, have not answered those questions, or at least they have not answered them to the fullest capacity. They certainly haven't written them down, and they don't have them in a way that tells a cohesive story. So I
Yeah.
start there. The why piece is really interesting. And that's not, to be clear, Simon Sinek, like start with why. That is his concept.
Yeah.
But it's a difficult concept for most businesses to attach themselves to because they want to answer what. But the thing that customers, prospects really attach to is that why. Why is this company existing? Why does it solve your problem? Why should it matter? That is really, at the end of the day, what differentiates you and what's important to come through in your messaging. And it's difficult.
It is difficult. I think as a designer, like in a lot of ways, when I'm approaching any sort of design project, it's asking those same questions, but to your point, actually nailing it and hitting it in a way that it all lines up and it all makes sense. It's not easy. And so I can imagine founders finding a lot of success working with you because a lot of times we just get caught in our own head. I can imagine the conversations you're having with people when you ask them why, and it would be a very meandering conversation all over the place. Yeah.
And you know what? I think that's okay. I think you need a little bit of that because here's the other piece we haven't talked about, right? How to nail the messaging. You have to talk to customers and prospects to see if you've gotten it right. Like you can't, we can sit and go through my process and come up with a statement that we love, right? Or statements that we love, but it's got to be tested. It's got to be battle tested somewhere to see like, did we get it? And if it's not resonating, you got to go back and make some tweaks. So it's internal work and some external work, I think, to really get it right.
Yeah. So it sounds like that's also part of your process, asking these questions of the team, the founder, and then also going and asking their customers. I know that's a big part of your background is market research. That's always been a part, I'm just gonna be honest, that's always been a part that I've struggled with personally. And so what are some things that you do either as the one doing the research or advising somebody doing market research? What are some like no fail processes and ways to do it effectively?
So for the companies that I work, I'm going to try to answer this two different ways. For the companies that I work with, again, small, early stage, likely can't afford true, like a full blown research study, right? So you have a me, or you have maybe the sales team, or you have the founder, and it can be as simple as literally picking up the phone and saying, "Hey, I've noticed you're a repeat buyer. What do you love about the product? What do you find difficult to use? Right? What would you love to see more of?" Just probing questions. You can phone, email. You could even use something like a Survey Monkey to do a quick, again, maybe 3 questions.
Okay.
How's it working for you? I think the piece that I find most fascinating is when a product is being used in a way that you didn't intend for it to be used. And that's something you need to hear because that affects your messaging. It affects product iteration, right? So, it can be as finding that or getting that research can be as simple as email, basic surveys, like it doesn't have to be hard. It just has to be done. Now, if you're a company that has a lot of budget, right? I'm not suggesting you never pick up the phone and talk to your customers one-on-one, but it's more likely that you are going to either use some formal tools, right? There's a lot of good AI research tools that are out there now. You could certainly work with a company that has years of experience putting surveys together, has panels, right? Focus groups, things like that. So there's a lot of ways to attack this problem. I think some of this depends on resources and budget.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Yeah.
And I'm just remembering back in my physical products company, the times that we did market research, and we did it pretty simply. We would just bring in a group of potential clients or current clients and show them product concepts that we were developing and working on, get their feedback.
Yeah.
Developing a product is very costly. And you need to know with tremendous confidence that your customers are going to be purchasing this next product, this next thing. And so it's really smart to shorten that feedback loop. and make sure that when you're investing in something, it's something that you know with tremendous confidence that there's demand for it.
Right.
And that people want it.
Right.
Yeah. There are so many marketing channels today, right? There is email, there's Instagram, there's podcasts, there's LinkedIn, there's Facebook, there's YouTube, there's even more beyond that. Those are kind of the core main ones. How does somebody make sure that they are consistent across all of these channels?
I think when you put together a plan for you, I could say the year, but I'd like to break it down into smaller parts. You need to think about what available resources you actually have.
Okay.
There, to your point, there are so many channels, right? You could say, I want to be in all of them.
Yeah.
Well, who's going to make the content for those? Who's going to actually distribute the content to all of those? How are we going to do it right? Like if somebody said that, I would say you have to ask the probing questions of how are we actually going to execute on that? So the next question becomes, and the most important, where do we think our customers or actual or prospective customers are actually going to interact with us? I guarantee you they're not on every marketing channel. I'm not on every marketing channel.
Yeah.
Right. I don't interact with the products that I buy on every channel. I have a few.
Yeah.
It's not always an easy question to answer, but you have to start with the hypothesis, right? Again, like I work with early stage companies, so almost everything is initially a little bit of an experiment.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, so if I'm working with my target audience is veterinarians, well, where do veterinarians interact with content?
Mm-hmm.
Is it maybe we could do some native ads, right? Maybe we could do some social, maybe we could do some email. So I think while it's tempting to want to do everything, I think it's more important to think about where is our audience likely going to appear and how can we produce content regularly and effectively for the right channels as opposed to being on all the channels, and measure it. See, you might be wrong, right? You might not be on the right channels. And I think that's okay initially. But if you try to go everywhere, most likely you're going to be inconsistent, and you will be unable to maintain that level of content for any amount of time.
So there's not necessarily one channel that's better than the other. You need to know where is your customer, and you specifically said, where is your customer engaging, which is super important.
Yep. I do think that there are some tried and true. For instance, I'll call out email here.
Yeah, talk about email.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's so powerful, and yes, tell me everything about email.
I think one of the beautiful things about owned content like that, right, which email is, you own your list. Big or small, it is yours. If they shut off all the social media channels tomorrow, you would still own email, right? You would still have your list. And that is a way that you can directly communicate, to your point earlier, have human, I know it's electronic, but use your human voice and words to interact with your list. And so I know everybody gets a ton of email, but done properly, thinking about your list, thinking about how your list could be divided up, it's such a great way to truly engage with both prospects and customers alike, and can be done so many different ways. But I love email. I know people love to hate on email, but I think it's still a super effective tool to connect and engage. I love it. And I'm going off a little bit of a tangent here, but you were talking about channels. I think you also have to kind of consider short and long-term plays. So, and having a nice combination of like, okay, so you have like a paid search maybe that might help for short term, but what about, blogging, content, things that are slower and more long-term? So that's something else to consider. Not only is where do we think our customers will show up and engage, but how can we kind of spread out our resources so that we're not a flash in the pan and have nothing to help us out months from now?
As we think about email and all of the platforms, it's very easy to get spread thin and be doing things in a really inefficient way. And I think one of the things that as entrepreneurs who are wearing many hats, we're always looking for those efficiencies.
Yep.
What are, especially producing content? Oh my word. Like it could be a full-time job. And I've watched even influencers where like that is their job and they get so burned out and like overnight they just stop. And it's like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
What are ways in which either you yourself personally, or you help clients navigate and create efficiencies when it specifically comes to creating content? Like that's one of the most important things when it comes to communicating with your clients. You just continually have to be publishing, whether it's an email or podcast so I know there's ways to do that in a hyper efficient way. And so answer that question. And if there's kind of case studies or models or specific examples, that would be super helpful.
Okay. So I'm going to use this example of like the 2 P's, which is planning and purpose. So when you are planning out your content, you need to know why. Like, what are you making it for? What is the intended goal? If you're writing blog posts, like blogging is great, but do you know why all those words are going up on your website? Are you trying to drive leads? Are you trying to drive awareness? Are you like, what is it? How will you know if those blogs are successful? So having a true understanding for why you're making content may actually help shorten up what actually gets produced. So that would be step 1. And then I mentioned plan. Okay, so you have got, just like with anything else in marketing, you have got to map out why are we doing what we're doing, and when, what channels, when is it going out, who's going to produce it. So some sense of, again, resourcing. Do we actually have the resources to produce this? Have a plan, know when it's happening. Now, then you have the ability to repurpose. So unfortunately, that starts with R and not P, so I can't lump that in there. But a blog could be turned into 3 social media posts, right? Yeah. Maybe it could be recorded as the content could be used in a webinar. Maybe it could be an email too. So again, this goes back to planning. How can I get the most out of one piece of content is an important conversation to have, because that helps make your content cycle more efficient, right? Suddenly, if you don't have to come up with 5 new social media posts because your blog was the inspiration for them. Fantastic. Less original content that has to be created. And not only can you repurpose your content that way, but you should also consider the fact that, let's say you posted your blog post to social media. How many eyeballs actually saw that post? 100, 1,000? Was it your full audience? I highly doubt it. Do you think they would remember it in 3 months, in 6 months? Probably not. Now, if it's an evergreen piece of content, you can 100% find a way to get it back into another newsletter, get it back up on a social. But again, this requires planning of how can we get this into the cycle. So repurposing is not only turning one piece of content into 5, it's can this be used in the calendar later on? And if you map it out that way, suddenly, we needed, and I'm making this up here, right? We needed 100 pieces of content this year. Suddenly we really needed 50 pieces of content that I could turn into 100 pieces of content. And that's great. And so I do this exact same method with my clients all the time. So I have one client right now where I'm just creating content for them, and we've mapped everything out, and one piece of content easily becomes 4, right? It goes to social 2 to 3 times. It's up on the blog. It's in an email. So beautiful. And then I think what I've loved to see with another client of mine, I'm just running the strategy side. So I'm not actually creating the content for them, but we map out all of what do we want to accomplish this year with our content, right? What's the plan? It's to drive awareness is what we decided that the intent of the blog is going to be. Nothing more, nothing less. It's important, right? You still need an awareness play, still huge. And so how do we do that? How do we show credibility, right? How do we show thought leadership? And how do we do all that to drive awareness? And again, all of those blogs have been turned into multiple pieces of content, including something we haven't talked about yet, lead magnets, one pagers, right? You really can getting mileage out of your content is huge, and I would highly recommend.
You've used the word blogs a lot.
Sorry.
No, don't apologize. I mean, I remember when I first heard people starting to talk about blogs when I was in college, like year 2000, 2001. And it almost seems like they're having this resurgence, but maybe I'm missing something. And like, I really admire people like Seth Godin. His whole business was primarily built off of blogs. Same with James Clear, right? Yeah. Building up an audience, just constantly giving value. Are blogs having a resurgence? And if so, how can we utilize them?
I think that organic search is definitely not as helpful as it used to be. And I feel like blogs were that main catalyst for driving organic search, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I know that when I go to any new company that I'm just curious about, want to learn more about, that's where I go, because that's the voice that you talked to, again, like the human touch, that's where it lives. I mean, the home pages, I mean, I'm not trying to sell the homepage. The homepage is important. But that human element, the stories, the case studies, the really good stuff is going to live there. And I feel like you have more of a chance to show off personality and just some other things that can't live on the homepage for various reasons. So do I think that blogs are having a resurgence? I hope so. I think so. I think they still have a place. Maybe that's the better statement to make, because it's also, you can use them just as landing pages, right? And, we talked about being efficient with content and dividing it up. I see the blog as such a great, like, that's the housing spot, or that's like the mothership for where content can come from. And so I hope so. I think blogs are here to stay, even if they're not as effective as they used to be.
Yeah, that's interesting, because in the past, to your point, they were part of what was driving people to do blogs was they were optimizing their organic search traffic and the SEO. And so today, what I'm hearing you say is that's a chance for you to connect with your potential customers in a more human way, because those are the stories that have that human element and make that connection that aren't necessarily on the homepage, right?
Right, exactly.
Interesting. Quick question for you. What would happen in your business and life if you could show up powerfully? As a coach to high-performing entrepreneurs, I help intelligent people like you do just that. And if you want to be inspired by people who are getting more done in 90 days than most people do all year, I'm going to invite you to go check out my case studies. The website is now.katierichardson.com/case study. And the cool thing is we've got so many case studies there. You can find an entrepreneur who's just like you. I've also got a link for you down in the show notes. Okay, back to the show. I'm actually super curious about you and your business. As you talk and you're sharing things, I get this sense that you don't have a huge team behind you. Is that correct?
It's just me.
Okay, Anne, can we talk about this? Because in the online business and marketing space, there's all this glorification of like huge revenue numbers and big team and scale. And listen, my early business was 2,000 stores in the US, distribution in 26 different countries, 20,000 square foot. Like, I've done the really, really big complex thing. And for the last 7 years, I've been asking myself, how little can I make my team and still have significant reach? Like, I've been honestly constantly trying and testing this. And like, I even heard James Clear confess to Tim Ferriss that he only had one team member. And I was like, me and James get each other. And so if you're like, I think there is such a beautiful opportunity. Scaling to the moon is not for everybody. It's not. And it comes with so much complexity and overwhelm, and you literally can never clock out. If you're a global business, then you're having to respond to emails and take calls in the middle of the night because you're speaking with people in Asia. And it's not necessarily a great lifestyle. It's not. And so, but yeah, at the same time, I can imagine your clients have needs beyond in marketing beyond what you do. So maybe give us a little picture of the day in the life of
Sure.
Anne Laffin and what that looks like.
So right now, my clients range from me being a fractional head of marketing to me writing content. And so my days will run from managing partnerships, right? Creating content, sitting in meetings, talking about strategy. I mean, all these things will happen within 30 minutes of each other. And I like that, right? I mean, I wouldn't have signed up to be
I can imagine you like that. Yeah.
a one-person shop if I didn't like variety, if I didn't like fast pace. I mean, there are days it gets tiring, but I signed up for this. Like, this was my choice. I decided to start this business, and I have, maybe someday I'll have a small team, but my goal was really to feel free and to do good work. Like, that's really it.
Yeah.
And so, the work that I take on, I'm selective about, but I like there to be a variety. So really, like, later today, I know I've got a couple meetings that are about content that we're working on. So that's going to happen. I've got a team meeting that I'm going to sit in on, right? And I'm going to hear about all the new things that are happening in the business. And I feel like I am completely embedded into that company and into the team. Whereas I don't always feel that way with some of the startups I work with. And that's okay. Like, that's not the intent. So it's very interesting. The range of experiences I have they're so different. And every startup is so different. So, I mean, not shocking. This time of year is also, there's a lot of planning that's going on, right? So, marketing plans, which I have taken a very new approach on after the last couple of years, realizing that plans need to be much smaller and tighter and far more flexible. So there's a lot of that happening right now. And year-end wrap-up, right? So, I mean, it really, like, my day will go from writing a blog to creating an email to doing my own business's marketing to, like, recording a podcast to then working on strategy for our partnerships. It's a mixed bag. It's all over the place.
Yeah, which, to your point, like, you have to love that. You have to enjoy that, and the element of variety, the unexpected, the adventure of it all. Yeah, that's super cool. And the other thing that I could see for startups who work with you, kind of an advantage that they have by working with you, is because you're in conversation and you're kind of knee deep in multiple businesses, you start to see trends, you start to see what's working, you see what's not working, and you can bring those advantages to your clients. And I'm really curious about this fractional CMO. I think there's probably an opportunity for some of our listeners who have a similar type business. Maybe it's in marketing or something else where they're, working by themselves or with a really small team. Tell me how that works. Like, how did you even find those sorts of deals? Because I think that's actually super smart on your part, and it's really smart on the startups because they can't necessarily afford a full-time CMO. So I'm curious, like, what size of business is this a really good solution for?
So I would say it's almost more the stage. So, like, pre-seed, seed round, maybe up to or through Series A. A fractional CMO or a fractional head of marketing is a good fit. Beyond that, investors, I think, want to see somebody full-time in-house. Like, you need to have your management team embedded and rolling, right? It's just a different, but early on, to your point, there's usually not a lot of capital. And to bring in a CMO to run a 1 or 2 person shop, you likely don't have those resources, but it doesn't mean you don't need that help.
Right.
So it's a fractional CMO or head of marketing, or even that first marketing hire needs to provide a few things. One, they have to provide some strategy. They have to be able to get you on some kind of path. That's key. But they have to be willing to roll up their sleeves and do work. because you don't have a team. So it is you've got to be able to walk the line of both. It's just, that's what it is.
It can be really hard to find those people. Like, I'm just looking back again at my other company, and there were times when I hired people that I thought were going to be like an Anne Laffin, and it's like strategy and implementation. And they would look back at us like, you want me to do it? You want me to lift a finger? And I'm like, what in the world? Who are you? Like, why do you think we hired you? I didn't need someone to come in and tell me what to do.
Right.
Like, that's not what I need right now. Yep. I need you to work.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I am using the word blog so many times today. I'm sorry. So I'm going to do it again right now.
That's great.
I wrote a blog way back in the day, and I love ice cream. You'll see where I'm going with this, but I love ice cream. And I consider that first marketing hire. Think of it this way, right? You've got a bowl of ice cream. Uh-huh. You need, you can have ice cream that doesn't go in a bowl, and it gets messy and sloppy. And there's kind of like you bring in a junior person, they don't have anything to contain themselves, right? You could just have the bowl, but then there's no ice cream in it. And it just sits there and isn't really all that fulfilling, because what you really wanted was ice cream. You need ice cream and a bowl, right? You need a container and the content. And that first person needs to be able to do both, because there's just or very little, I shouldn't say no, but it's likely there's not much resourcing. Yeah. And it's tough, right? It's not a smooth process, but that is what I've learned. I feel like there's so much specialization happening in marketing right now. Mm-hmm. And I love that. And I envy those people, but I'm not your girl for that. Yeah. I'm the one that comes in the beginning to get the foundation down and get things rolling. That's what I do.
Have you ever met a company that you're excited and passionate about what they're doing? They don't have the resources right now to hire you, and so you end up doing some creative type of a deal, whether it's equity or a revenue share?
100%. I'm very open to that. Right now, I couldn't take all clients that way, because that would just be silly, right? But of course, that's equity is huge in the startup world, and I fully understand that and appreciate that for sure.
Yeah, that's super cool. I love it. We've covered so much ground in 33 minutes, Anne. I love it. Did you say you have a podcast yourself?
No, I don't have a podcast, but this has been part of my own marketing strategy this year, is to just build awareness for myself. Yeah. And for my own business, I should say, and test out messaging and get comfortable. Get comfortable. I've never run a business. I mean, and I'm a small business, right? But I think it's important to be able to do things like this, to put yourself out there. And if I were to recommend this strategy to founders I work with now, I can say hey, here's what I do. Here's what's worked. It makes me more comfortable to share strategies when I know I've done it and how it's worked for me. It makes sense, right? But
well, that's one of the things that's kind of fascinating about you, is you came from a more, I don't know if it was corporate or just traditional background, and yet you speak to these startups, these entrepreneurs, and you speak to them very well. You know their pain, you know their frustration, and yet it sounds like that wasn't your story. And there's so many people who love a lot of the things about the startup world, but it doesn't necessarily make sense for them to kind of take the leap and fully take on this tremendous responsibility. I'm just thinking, in so many ways, I look back on the business that I built and I was like, what were you thinking? There was 5 businesses in one, but I just didn't know. It was just take the next step, take the next step. And then before I knew it, I had this global business that was a manufacturer, a design house, a distributor, a wholesaler, a retailer. And it's I mean, what else would you do? And it doesn't make sense for everybody to build that kind of a business. And yet, to your point, there's freedom, there's flexibility, there's adventure, there's doing something that's meaningful within the entrepreneurial space. And it's really cool to hear you and your story, and coming from the corporate world and having all of that wisdom and experience and research. And you're such an asset to entrepreneurs. And you're able to help and support them, even though you yourself didn't go through that journey. And so I just like want to take a second to people in the audience. I know some people who listen to me want to be an entrepreneur, have dreams of taking that leap and that step someday, but maybe have not quite done that. How did you take that leap? I mean, there's so much, I would say it's not real, but it's like this perceived safety in the corporate world, right?
Yeah.
And you stepped out of that. So how did you make that transition?
It was a long process. So to your point, I mean, I was in the corporate world for a long time. And while I enjoyed it and I learned a lot and I'm glad I was there, right?
Yeah.
It was not fulfilling. I just found it very, and I don't think I realized at the time.
How did you know? How did you know it wasn't fulfilling? How did that show up?
Yeah. I'm not even sure it's like it's going to sound really hokey. It was almost like an intangible type thing, like a feeling of just going to work every day and being like, this like sense of dread maybe, and just feeling like there has to be more. And when I managed the marketing department at a financial planning software startup. And that's actually how I kind of really got into this gig here. And I'll circle back on that in a second. But that was the first time, working there, I felt that kind of like zing and that like that fast pace that like, I was like, I love this. And I realized like I loved to build, right? I was employee 6 and everything basically was coming from scratch. So I realized I like to build. I like the fast-paced environment. I like to see quick wins and quick losses. I realized what I didn't like was incremental change. I don't do well there.
Things move so slow in the corporate world. Yeah, so slow.
I can't, it's not good for me. But the other piece of that, so my dad ran a small business. And I think that watching him have flexibility, also watching him struggle, like there were definite years where things didn't go well. But there were years where things went really well. But watching him have that freedom was always sort of in the back of my mind, even as a kid, just kind of like, I would say, I want to run a business someday, but like, that's all it was. But, move forward 20, 30, whatever, 40 years at this point. When the pandemic hit, I had been working with a business coach for about 1.5 years. And she knew I was feeling unsatisfied and just unfulfilled, and also knew that I really wanted to start a business. And so this all kind of like, it was like the perfect storm of me finally having the right push, me getting some coaching to build out the parts of my professional personality that needed to be pushed, and working with startups and realizing I liked it a lot. And so it was a weird, like, again, like the perfect storm of things coming together for me finally to be like, you know what, I'm going to take the leap. What did make it easier for me too was that I had a good friend of mine has a startup. And was my first client. And is still a client of mine. And having that kind of like safety net allowed me to fully jump into the abyss and feel like this might work. And so 3.5 years later, I'm still here.
That is so cool. That those first moments of kind of exiting the traditional path can be really terrifying. I was just remembering the moment I went off of traditional health insurance, and being on the other side of that was always something that everybody feared. If your insurance lapses and you don't get something, then no one's going to take you after that. Well, as a startup, my insurance rates tripled overnight. I had this family of 5, and I'm like, you want me to pay more in health insurance than my mortgage payment, and we're healthy? And I'm like, never get sick? Sorry, that's not going to work. And so like in a lot of ways, I just didn't have a choice. And I was like, we're stepping into the unknown, family. And I remember my sister being like, what are you doing? Because you're breaking out of the norms. You're breaking out of what most people consider to be safe and acceptable. And you're going into this risky direction. And yet you've probably, now that you're on the other side, you're like, hey guys, it's not so bad over here. In fact, it's way better. It's not as risky as you think. And you're in charge of how much money you make. And if you want more income, well, then you just work more and you go find those clients. And
Yep.
there's something just so freeing about stepping onto the other side of that wall that until you do, it's like nobody who goes over there ever comes back.
I don't know what happens over there.
Yeah, it feels so risky and scary. And yet you're living the adventure that comes with having the courage to step over into that world, which is really, really cool. And I'm really inspired by this place that you found yourself where you get to be a part of that. And like, I know that you're a team of one, and so you don't necessarily consider yourself a startup.
Yeah.
But like a lot of the quote risks, calculated risks that entrepreneurs take, you're taking those too. So there is a lot that you have in common with your customers and clients, even though you don't have a big team that you're leading and directing. And, I think that qualifies you to be working with them in the way that you do. And I'm trying to imagine everybody who's listening to us right now. And there's probably people who are like right there at the edge, they're staring at that wall and they're like, do I go on the other side? Am I going to regret that if I go over there? I don't know if I can come back. And the thing is, if you go over there, you don't want to go back. And to your point, you went to work and you're like, oh,
yeah.
Like, this is not
this is
good
not
for
it.
my soul.
Yeah. No, that was really it. Like, it was like soul crushing.
Yeah. So cool. Okay. Well, Anne, this has been an incredible conversation. I do have a couple of rapid fire questions for you here at the end.
Let's do it.
What is a book that you revisit and maybe share, or you've read it more than once?
The War of Art.
I was just interviewed yesterday, and that's my answer too. I love that book. What is it you love about it?
It's the idea of resistance. I'm going to tell you a really hokey story about this, if that's okay. So my husband and I both go to the gym at 5 a.m. Like, that's when we can go. So, and this morning he was saying, he was telling me, like, he's like, well, I got up and then, I went to brush my teeth, and then he's like, I was going to be late. And he's like, yeah, I was just thinking maybe I don't need to go. He's like, but I went. And I was like, that literally I was like, that's resistance right there. It's like, I'm cold. I'm so tired. I get it's not applied to business, but like, that's it every day though. You are fighting that, whatever that is, every day in every situation. It's wild. And so that idea just resonated with me so much, particularly because I read that right kind of after I was starting a business. I was like, oh man, this is what I'm up against.
Yes. Okay. I have to add to this because I started to realize that a lot of my internal resistance, people talk about an inner child. Well, I have an inner teenager, and she just tries to derail me all day. And something that I realized, I figured this out, is such a cool trick. If I play the music that she listened to when I was like 15, 16, 17 years, and it's Led Zeppelin. If I play Led Zeppelin, she's like, sweet, let's go for a run. Like, she stops fighting me. And I've been lifting to Led Zeppelin, and it's been so fun. So like aligning with that resistance rather than fighting against it.
Yeah. Being like, what is that resistance trying to tell you? What does it want?
Yeah.
And then how do you, I love that too. That's great.
So it sounds like you go to the gym. I'm curious about people's habits. What's something that you do consistently every day?
Movement is key for me every day. I'm an avid runner. I'm a distance runner. I love going to the gym. So I have a dog, so he could walk constantly. So some type of movement is going to be a part of my day. And that's probably the most consistent part of my day is that.
Cool.
Yeah.
Did you climb fences and walls as a kid?
No, but I would look for any water I could get into.
Oh,
That's what I
okay.
wanted. I wanted
Okay.
water all the
Okay.
time. Yeah.
Okay. Um, what's some advice that you've been given that really served you in maybe a moment of difficulty?
I think for me, I know I am an emotional person,
Hmm.
and that has not, I don't want to say it always has not served me. So learning how to maybe make it serve me or to figure out what those things are telling me is huge. So advice was kind of like, you know, take a minute,
Hmm.
take a beat, take a minute to try to process when your
Hmm.
emotions get high, what's going
Hmm.
on and what can you learn from them. And I did not always do that. And I have really put that in place. Really, I'm saying the last 10 years, it's helped immensely.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
So
awesome.
yeah,
Yeah. Great advice because our emotions can sometimes hijack us, right? And then
for
we like
sure.
see ourselves doing something that we don't want to do, but it's like, I cannot stop this train.
Nope.
Yeah. So that's great. Take a beat, take a pause. Awesome. And where are you most active on social? Where can people find you?
I am most active on LinkedIn. You can definitely find me there. You can also find me on my website, finmarketingm.com. But yeah, LinkedIn is my home.
Finmarketing.com, which I love. I'm assuming that comes from your last name, Laffin.
Yep.
Awesome. Finmarketing.com. Anne Laffin, this has been an incredible conversation. Thank you so much. And
Thank you
for
so much.
everybody who's listening, this is what's working now.